Dune is my new obsession. I really don't know how I didn't know about this sooner. I feel like I've been living under a rock. It's essentially Game of Thrones in space, but with religion, witches, giant sandworms, and drugs.
Thank you, Stilgar.
What the? So, it's 2021. The first Dune has come out and I'm hooked.
And the Oscar goes to Dune.
Dune. Hans Zimmer. Dune.
After watching the first Dune, I was intrigued to see where this story was going. Being someone who routinely discusses the hero's journey and philosophy on this channel, I could see that we were set up for another archetypal hero. Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, Neo, another chosen one, if you will.
To bring forth the one.
So naturally wanting to know how this story concluded, I bought the book, expecting another hero's journey, and my god was I surprised. I quickly came to realize Dune wasn't just another hero's journey story. No. Dune took all the motifs of a hero's journey and slapped a giant warning label on it instead. A little confusing, right? What's so bad about the hero's journey? Transformation, atonement, learning lessons about oneself. How bad can that be? Well,
leaders are human beings.
when Frank Herbert wrote Dune, he wanted to ensure people thought for themselves.
And when they make mistakes, their mistakes are amplified by the numbers who follow without question.
To be very wary of charismatic leaders.
And that's why I say think for yourself, ask questions.
That blindly following a man can lead to dangerous outcomes.
Holy war spreading across the universe like unquenchable fire.
Sometimes it's through no fault of the leader themselves. He might have a just cause, perhaps vengeance on people who did him wrong.
They killed my father.
Your father didn't believe in revenge.
Yeah, well, I do.
But through making this figure a messiah, through putting them on a pedestal, we then remove the ability to interrogate their faults. What if that figure led us down the wrong path? What if he got billions killed?
I'm pointing the way!
This is the central idea behind Dune Part 2 and why I love it so goddamn much. In Part 1 we got a sliver of this notion.
I see a holy war spreading across the universe like unquenchable fire.
But here we get to see Paul push against ascending to the power he's foretold to have. To reject the prophecy. To not go south. To remain equal and not above those that worship him.
Well, I'd very much like to be equal to you.
However, through adversaries that force his hand, Paul accepts his role as the listener Al-Gaib, the prophesied savior of Arrakis.
It's their name for Messiah.
It's essentially like Anakin Skywalker, being gassed up as the chosen one as he does, but then having the self-awareness enough to know that their very power will corrupt his being, his worldview, his values. But being self-aware of Bene Gesserit propaganda and false stories can't stop him from following this path.
I will do what must be done.
A path he has to take to save the ones he loves. A path he knows will corrupt him.
I am Paul Muad'Dib Atreides, Duke of Arrakis!
That Paul become a different man the moment he drinks from the elixir of life and becomes the Kwisatz Haderach.
You will never lose me as long as you stay who you are.
Now it's not just another hero's journey we've seen before, I'd argue it's the hero's journey, aware of the trappings of making a hero, a messiah, a figure of worship. Tying into that is the Bene Gesserit, the witch-like figures who can speak the voice, manipulating and orchestrating the politics of the universe. Such stories of saviors, of prophecy for hundreds of years, filling the locals of Arrakis, the Fremen, with stories of the listener Al-Gaib.
This prophecy is how they enslave us!
While some reject this notion, others believe in a savior.
I don't care what you believe, I believe!
It calls into question how easy it is to make someone a messiah, someone people can rally behind. Alternatively, it also shows how bulletproof the messiah can become. You can't kill the figure because that will spark further deification, making them a martyr.
Send assassins.
No, prophets get stronger when they die.
It's an interesting character arc Paul goes on as a protagonist. He goes through the hero's journey, the refusal of the call, the acceptance, but in accepting that power, it corrupts him.
You will never lose me as long as you stay who you are.
Silence!
Now Paul Atreides is the protagonist of Dune, but he is not the story's hero. Dune Messiah, the follow-up book to the original Dune, expands on this notion. It was a reaction to the fact that people perceive Paul as the hero, as a savior. Denis made sure that in his adaptation that it stressed this point, that his adaptation stuck closer to the idea Frank intended.
The book was a warning for him about a messianic figure.
That Paul and his story is a warning rather than a hero's journey.
For that, he wrote Dune Messiah to correct and to make sure that people understood his intention.
As said in the first book, no more terrible disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero. This is something stressed in Part 2 and I'd argue would be the main focus of a third film if they decided to follow up with Dune Messiah. That we shouldn't give up our critical faculties to people in power, that we should be encouraged to think for ourselves, because at the end of the day, when we remove the veil of savior from that person, we see them as just that, as a person. We understand they make human mistakes too. Giving them an army and a just cause amplifies their mistakes on a grander scale.
Their mistakes are amplified by the numbers who follow them without question.
This prophecy is how they enslave us!
That is power.
I do want to stay locked to that point though. Power. Frank Herbert wants to talk about a lot of things in Dune, but frequently it always circles back to power. How we use power, who has it, how we keep, how we attract it, and who it calls to.
A great man doesn't seek to lead. He's called to it, and he answers.
Famously, he said, power doesn't corrupt, it just attracts the corruptible.
But I think power attracts the corruptible.
This might be best seen through the Baron Harkonnen, who symbolizes indulgence, gluttony, and greed, dying at the steps of his desires, clawing his way to the Emperor's seat, the throne, chasing power. I think there's definitely something to be said about power across space, ruling a world, a galaxy, or a universe, but a layer of power that interests me more is power across time.
Powerful enough to bridge space and time.
The Kwisatz Haderach, the Bene Gesserit's word for chosen one, was to be the being that could bridge space and time, a male Reverend Mother of sorts, one who could see through past and future to light the way for humanity.
I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
Originally, the Bene Gesserit had planned, orchestrated for centuries to breed this savior by marrying Feyd-Rautha with the female heir of House Atreides, but Lady Jessica defied the order and had a son instead.
In defiance of our rule, you were told to bear only daughters, but you in your pride thought you could produce the Kwisatz Haderach.
Was I wrong?
This set in motion a different series of events to what they had planned, resulting in Paul becoming this figure. Essentially, these witches love eugenics, breeding bloodlines over long stretches of time. It's a long-scale mission which fits in with how they've seeded stories of saviors, prophecies of the One.
That means the Bene Gesserit have been at work here.
Planting superstitions.
Preparing the way, Paul. We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
Their long-term vision for the future makes this story so much bigger than the immediate events happening. It's not just about space, it's about time, it's about the hundreds of years before, it's about where the decisions in the now lead us in the future. It's these consequences, the fallout of these events, that will take center focus in Dune Messiah, what we're hoping will be Dune Part 3. As mentioned before, Dune Messiah is the follow-up book to the original Dune. Taking place over a decade later, we see what comes of Paul's Holy War. The book explores the cost of leadership, the burden of foresight, and the consequences of becoming a messianic figure. The novel challenges us with questions about destiny, free will, and the complexities of humanity's future. We see Paul ruling from Arrakis. 60 billion people have been killed in his holy war, and Paul is yet to father any children with his wife, Princess Irulan, who plots to kill him alongside with the Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, and a group who we didn't see in either Part 1 or 2, the Twi'leksu. Aaliyah becomes a more prominent figure with her own worshippers, but largely the important takeaway to understand is that Paul is struggling with the fallout of becoming such a leader. Additionally, when you can see past, present, and future, how do you take action? When facing various threats, how does one not become tormented by seeing possible futures play out? In avoiding certain grim realities, you might be unleashing even worse ones. Paradoxically, in avoiding specific futures, it may inadvertently bring about the very future you tried to avoid. In other words, this is a really heady follow-up, a thinking man's sequel that's less focused on action and more on the political intrigue and the emotional consequences of beginning said holy war. To me, Dune Part 2 was more of a Star Wars movie, whilst Dune 3, Dune Messiah will be more of a Star Trek movie. If we go through with a Part 3, I'm expecting it to jump 20 years instead of 10, just so Anya Taylor-Joy can reprise her role as Aaliyah. I doubt they'll age up and recast our main characters, they'll probably just give them a beard or some age lines, but I do want to touch on the fact that this is more of an ethereal thinking man's sequel, which presents a problem regarding it being a film. Is it possible to make a finale of a trilogy so light on action? Can it even be done? Will it leave people disappointed? One way of remedying this is showing flashbacks to said Holy War. Frank Herbert was always light on describing his action scenes, so perhaps we get to see the Holy War in flashbacks, different houses falling at war with one another. And that's important too, because part of Messiah is seeing this war get out of Paul's hands. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Partly why I think Dune Part 2 is such a strong sequel is because of the political intrigue. Everyone gunning for power and it all building to a moment where they're all in one room. This is definitely the basis for what makes Messiah so interesting, but like I said, Part 2. Where were we? Dune Part 2 is the story I needed, at least right now. A story that isn't afraid to have a romance, something modern Hollywood just seems so afraid to give a woman these days. It isn't undercutting dramatic moments with jokes either. Marvel. Rather, it finds the humour in our character's worldview. Stilgar's comedic relief, I never thought I'd say that, was welcomed. The contrast between the believer and non-believer Fremen made for natural moments of levity that didn't take me out of the movie. It's just so refreshing to see a movie made these days that invokes a genuine sense of awe. In terms of cinematic gravity, we haven't seen something like this since Revenge of the Sith. In terms of scale, we haven't seen something like this since The Two Towers. Dune, and specifically Part 2, has the chance to be this generation's Lord of the Rings, or even Star Wars. For so long, Dune has said to be unfilmable. Its unconventional structure, dense themes, unique dialogue, world building, and characters made this an impossible task, but Denis has managed to make something not only watchable, sorry Lynch, but also truly great. An epic movie that comes across once in a generation. A movie you don't watch, you experience. I'm excited to see where Dune goes, how our characters wrestle with their humanity as this holy war weighs on them. And I'm not joking either, Dune is the ultimate story of, would you love me if I was a worm? Now that makes a ton of sense if you've read the other books. That being said, Dune Part 2 left me shell-shocked, a tense movie that grips you and doesn't let go until the credits roll. And Greg Fraser, oh my god, he's totally clutched the Oscar with how gorgeous this movie looks. That's not forgetting the sound either. Hans Zimmer elevates this entire movie to feel like an experience worth seeing, worth hearing on the big screen. I knew going into Dune Part 2 it would be a solid movie at the very least. Heck, it's kind of hard to screw up when you have one of the best sci-fi books ever made being adapted by some of the most talented people working in the industry right now in front of and behind the camera. But wow, Dune Part 2 really is worth seeing on the big screen. A cultural event that isn't watched, it's experienced. Alright guys, that's the video. I just want to say thanks so much for watching. Thank you for being patient while I was on my break. I was on holiday and I've just moved house, so this is the new place. It's my Illuminati members, my followers on Patreon that have kept this channel alive during my break. Daniel, Christos, Draco, David, Alexis, Lance, Holland, Carson, Braden, Ziggy, Unlucky Dreamer, Julian, Emrin, Shauna Darchi, Cam, and Archie. You guys are the ones that have kept this channel alive during my break. I'm eternally grateful, and that means I can now get stuck back into making more content. We've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. For those who have been waiting, yes, X-Men is coming. Working tirelessly on that. I'm also doing a collaboration with another YouTuber that I'll keep quiet on just for now. But with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao.